Hello, everybody. Welcome to the live stream. Sorry for the late apology. There was a bit of technical issues thanks to Windows enforcing an update, but also a bit of mild flirtation as well because it is Valentine's week. And, well, we hope you've had a good time with your loved ones. That's why I'm in red, because Ben is my Valentine. We spend most of the time talking to each other, so, it's only right. But yeah, before we get into it all, how are you doing today, Ben?
Yes, all good, Jay. Another busy Friday. It's absolutely blown a hoolie. So if you have some interference on the mic, that cannot be helped. It is up to 75 miles per hour gusts blowing here at the minute. So we have a big weather warning in place. And it's whipping through Gateshead. But
Yeah.
other than that, absolutely fine, mate.
And in terms of it, just for everybody on the show today, make sure to check out the Premier Injuries website. We try and go through all the latest injury info, but if you don't have your question answered this time, you can always check it out here. We've got all the teams alphabetically, and you click on the latest news. But also, if that doesn't answer your question, you can always message me and Ben through the YouTube or through our Twitter handles, which are in the description. But we're going to get on to the team news. But actually, first we got Wesley. He says hi from Ireland. We've got FPL Popo, and we've got Tunji as well. He's from Sierra Leone.
Wow.
That's quite good. I'm quite excited. We're going fully
That's
global
fantastic.
here. So as always with this, just to remind people, we are going to go through the teams alphabetically. I'll put this in the chat box as well, just so people know what is happening. But we're going to go through all the teams alphabetically, so try and time your questions around each team. And then if there's any questions at the end, we'll try and smash them through. But we're going to end around about 3 today. So let's get going. Ben, Bournemouth.
Yes.
What is the latest with the Cherries?
To be honest, I'm not expecting much change from Gary O'Neill. Good performance against Newcastle, disappointing for us, a 1-1 draw, but we'll take that point. There was one question mark over Marco Senesi. That was a lower back issue impact. So thankfully, it stiffened up at half-time, tried to continue that second half. He couldn't, but thankfully, he has responded really well to treatment this week. So it looks like the South American will be okay to play. So I don't expect too many changes in that Bournemouth lineup. Like I say, after an impressive performance.
Yes, so switching from Bournemouth, we're going to go to Arsenal. It was a bit of a disappointing result. And one of the big things that maybe influenced it was the injury to Thomas Partey. But is the weekend too soon for him?
Now, initially, this was reported as a muscle problem, which obviously would call into question his availability given the quick turnaround. By Mikel Arteta's admission, this was a very late call, as he put it. But it transpired that it was more of a muscle problem in the lower back. Suspect it was a back spasm. Now, they do tend to respond quite well to treatment. Now, Mikel Arteta said that he would be assessed and a decision would be made after training today. So we need to see, one, whether he can train fully, and then two, whether there are any reaction with that or not. As it currently stands, I have Jorginho in that sort of central midfield position. It's one maybe that I could potentially change later on as maybe more news becomes available. Like I say, it's a 50-50 call. If it had been a straight up muscle problem, hamstring, calf, groin, thigh, quadriceps, then I probably would have said, look, it's too much. But the fact that it was a lower back issue, then maybe that does give him a chance.
And so with the others in the team, we're seeing that you've kind of taken out Ben White. You've taken out Tomiyasu for Ben White. So kind of with that situation there, was that just because it was tactical for Manchester City? And do you think that Tomiyasu hasn't done enough to kind of keep his place in the team?
Yeah, I mean, many questioning saying Ben White was a little bit unfortunate, but, I think Tomiyasu did deserve his place in that start 11 against Manchester City. And of course, with this being the third game in a week, Mikel Arteta will want to freshen his side, and there's a few changes in there. Now, the goal that Kevin De Bruyne scored, most will remember the fact of, how Tomiyasu's part in that. And I suppose that maybe had a reflection or certainly a bearing on this starting 11, which is why I've brought sort of Ben White in there. On the opposite flank, you could argue that maybe Kieran Tierney would be somebody that would come into Zinchenko, but I'm not being tempted by that one. But higher up the pitch, there's been a lot of talk about Gabriel Martinelli and Leandro Trossard and the possible sort of rotation risks there and limited minutes. And I've actually went for Trossard. He was picked out by Mikel Arteta in his press conference. He actually said that every time he's come on, he has had an impact. And of course, we've seen his goal from the bench against Brighton. So in my opinion, he deserves a start this weekend. Of course, it'll be a big call.
Hopefully it's Arteta's opinion as well, because I've been so impressed with him in terms of it, all the games. I love Martinelli, but I think he's a bit of a jaded character at the moment. I think maybe the amount of minutes and the amount of pressure he's had on him, plus also the lack of Gabriel Jesus kind of floating over to that left-hand side of the pitch has meant that at times he's a bit overcrowded, whereas Nketiah kind of drops a little bit more centrally. But we do have a couple of questions. Also, FPL Popo is from Swaziland, but GV has said Arsenal are a tired team. Do you think that there is a bit of a fatigue issue with the team at the moment?
Look, we haven't seen a great deal of rotation from Mikel Arteta game week to game week. The squad has remained relatively fit, barring one or two absences. When they're playing games, once every 7 or 8 days, then really there shouldn't be an issue. We're coming off the back of that mid-season World Cup break. This is the first time that they've had, a couple of games in quick succession, really. Is fatigue an issue? To be honest, I wouldn't really have thought so. If there are anything that is evident in terms of their outputs, in terms of their GP tracking, their individual metrics, then Mikel Arteta, has a flexibility and a little bit of depth within his squad to be able to change that around a little bit. So I don't really think that, that is an issue. It's something that has been brought up and something that was voiced during that second 45 against Manchester City, but I don't really see the schedule having a massive impact on Arsenal at the minute. It's not as if they've got that big, high accumulative load from playing, 3 games every week, midweek and weekends. It just hasn't been happening. So, suffice to say, Arsenal could keep on performing with a relatively fixed starting 11, albeit, if players are fit and not suspended from now until the remainder of the rest of the campaign.
Yeah, I think as well, from my opinion, looking at the matches and stuff, the reason why we've not done too well in the last 3, Everton was kind of unlucky, the switch of manager, the switch and style of play. It was tough to anticipate what Sean Dyche would do. Brentford, I think we're struggling with mid-block teams and we need a plan B. So Brentford basically did the same thing. And I think as well, obviously we're unlucky not to win that game. And in the Man City game, a lot of those problems was of our own making. The kind of the situation with Tomiyasu, then one of the other goals was down to our own fault. And, probably, I think the occasion got to a young team. I think that was the pressure of it. But the opponents this weekend are Aston Villa. That's who we're moving on to next. And I'm hopeful that the team will have a good result. But will injuries help or hinder the Villains?
I'm hoping that'll help, or certainly Villa supporters and Unai Emery will hope that it helps. Now, Tyrone Mings has trained. Of course, he missed out last weekend. That was a massive loss. He's the leader at the back. He's the guy, probably the only one that really organises things. So he has trained, and although Unai Emery did say, that he'd make a later decision, in no doubt in my mind that he comes, back in at that left-hand side centrally. Other positions that are potentially up for debate. Lucas Digne hasn't looked great, and I have went Mourinho in the past, but he seems to be sticking with the Frenchman and bringing him off early with Mourinho getting more minutes. Now, whether that's just a case of him adapting to the style of play and integrating him slowly to build those minutes remains to be seen. And also John McGinn, I have him returning on the right-hand side at the expense of Ramsey. He's coming off the back of that hamstring problem. But like I say, Villa haven't been in great form. So they need, to get a win under the belt to really kickstart the second half of their campaign.
Yeah, and their underlying data doesn't look that good either since Unai Emery's come in. It's not been a massive turnaround that I was expecting or hoping for, because I really like Unai Emery. I think he does well with smaller clubs as well. He helps build them up into bigger institutions, but it's just not happened thus far. Maybe it will in the coming weeks. Brentford are up next though. Just seriously impressive, aren't they, at the moment? Ivan Toney leading the line, but what's the kind of situation within the club? Is there injury boosts? Any injury problems that are potentially going to stop this amazing run that they're on?
Yeah, I think it's 10 games unbeaten now. Stand me if I'm corrected. But, when things are going well and confidence is high and they're getting results, you tend to see that there's a correlation between that and a squad that is relatively fit and healthy. Of course, there are the normal knocks and niggles and ailments along the way, but nothing too serious. Pontus Jansson won't make this one, but the Bees blank in 25, so they should be back in 26. We also seen the return of Frank Onyeka for the B team on Valentine's night and come through a run out there, but he isn't quite ready for league action. We see Thomas Frank switch from a 3-5-2 to a 4-3-3, from their home and away matches. So we see the return here of a 4-3-3, which inherently means that Wissa will join Mbeumo and also Ivan Toney in attack. And I also a recall in there for Aaron Hickey, like I say, in that flat four where Christoph Ayer is one of three centre-backs in a 3-5-2.
And this, he's one of those players under the surface, just doing really good bits, great finisher, and maybe with his involvement in the team as well, they can kind of have a really good game this weekend, maybe a few goals as well. But another team that has absolutely impressed recently is Brighton. Again, what is the injury situation there though?
Yeah, nothing major in terms of the starting 11 or predicted lineup as we see it. There has been quite a serious setback for Adam Lallana. That was a muscle issue, believed to be hamstring. He was supposed to be there or thereabouts this weekend, but this latest setback, it will keep him on the sideline for potentially months, which could end his campaign. Also, this game comes too soon for Danny Welbeck. Places up for grabs. Evan Ferguson was fit last weekend, but only utilised from the bench. It was a toss-up between him and Dennis Undav, but I've went with Ferguson this weekend. The other options that we potentially have, we could have Adam Webster in at centre-back with Veltman on the right-hand side, with Lamptey missing out. But I've went with Lamptey this time around. But like I say, it is a close call with that one.
And what are your feelings on this game with Fulham? Because a lot of people, even the predicted points, Matoma is in like the top 7, top 8 for this game week. But looking at the data, looking at the recent performances, Fulham have actually become a more sturdy defence, haven't they? They've got 4 clean sheets since the World Cup restart. They've only conceded, I think it's, 4 goals as well. They've got positive goal difference of 6 in that time. They're looking quite good. And a lot of that is down to Leno as well, one of the top performances. But what is your feeling? Do you think there could be almost an upset where Brighton don't get the result against Fulham?
I think it should be a really good open attacking game. 2 teams in great form. Like you say, if Marco Silva surprised everybody in how well, the Cottagers have done this season in the form that Mitrovic. There is a slight question mark over Mitrovic in terms of this ongoing foot issue that is hampering him. So he isn't quite 100%. And also the fitness of Willian. They're 2 big players for Fulham, and it depends if they come through those final sessions unscathed and ultimately, how fit they are if they're included. So that may have a little bit of a bearing on the game, but I can see this being a fairly entertaining draw. I'm sitting right on the fence. Ooh. But I do see goals despite, the records that you I think Brighton have 5 clean sheets and 10 at home this season. So again, they've got another great defensive record, but I'm going with 2-2.
Interesting. So also GV has asked, does that mean we can get McAllister? I mean, would you get him?
I loved him pre-World Cup, and then everything that I thought about the player, out in Qatar just reinforced that. The Seagulls are riding a little bit of a crest of a wave, and you want to sort of buy and back players who are in form. He's, with Adam Lallana potentially out for the rest of the season, then you have that number 10 role in effect, advanced role that he can play, with Gross and Caicedo in behind is a possibility. So look, I don't think he's going to be too far away from getting those goal involvements. And look, he's cheap enough. He's an enabler. So I would give him some serious consideration.
Now, a lot of people are kind of rushing in to Chelsea assets. They're loving the look of João Felix. He's had one good game. I think for me personally, it's a bit too much. There's a lot of hype and everything for a Chelsea team that I think, since the World Cup restart, the manager has kind of focused on defence, and we've seen, a lot of good clean sheets. We've seen the team actually fairly impressive there with only 5 goals conceded, 4 clean sheets, and Kepa Arrizabalaga is like probably the main beneficiary. But going forward, I've not really seen many improvements. Have you, Ben?
Very little, to be honest. And unfortunately, I've had fires to fight elsewhere, so I've been stuck with Kai Havertz for several weeks. The favour does, the fixture favours me holding on to him for one more game week, but it really is last chance saloon. If he can't get on the score sheet in this type of fixture and really should be hitting at least a brace, then, it's bye-bye. Chelsea, if they have any aspirations of doing anything this season, they really need to go out and they need to put a marker in the sand and get a great result here and a few goals to boost confidence.
Well, Tunji's asking as well, not just with your FPL team, but in terms of the team in general, would Havertz continue to start after wasting all the chances in the past few weeks? I mean, is his place under threat?
Possibly. It looks like Aubameyang is out of the equation. He has been linked with a move away. As far as I'm aware, that hasn't happened at this moment in time. Fofana is the other player who could potentially come in. That's David Fofana. But he lacks that little bit of ex-Premier League experience, so I don't really see him being thrown straight in there at the moment. Kai Havertz isn't a striker. He isn't an out-and-out finisher. He isn't a real goal scorer. He will work hard. He will give you options. He will be busy. But really, who else is Graham Potter got? He certainly hasn't got anybody that he seems to really like at this moment in time. So really by default, and with this formation, I have João Felix up there supporting him, and that might try and ease a little bit of that attacking burden, as it were. I mean, is this team locked in? Am I happy with it? Not 100%, because I understand, and there's maybe people out there looking on that left-hand side. Ben Chilwell, I don't think is ready to start, having played 70 minutes in the Champions League. That was fatigue-related withdrawal. Cucurella is the obvious miss, and maybe there's a little bit of a gap on that left-hand side, but I'm struggling to, as we've seen with Graham Potter since his arrival, he loves to change things up, and I'm struggling to get a left back in. It would maybe mean pulling Mason Mount out, but he's sat on the bench for the last 2, and I do think he's due a start, unless it's related to this stalling of talks over his contract. I just don't know.
Interesting. GV has said Havertz is Chelsea's Darwin Núñez, and there could be some interesting comparisons. It's just the Chelsea situation. I think there's a lot there, and I wouldn't invest in their assets just because, like you said, Ben, it's not really clear who's going to start each game week. Potter already, before he was even at Chelsea, he was a master of the kind of roulette wheel. He loved a bit of rotation. And then, do you know which games it was? But you said at one point in the season he was averaging 5 changes a game in the Premier League.
Yeah, I think that was just after January, and looking, like we say, just trying to sort of second guess. And so in terms of where Graham Potter was at Brighton and also Chelsea, he is the manager that's picked a side that's most difficult to predict, with the highest number of changes week on week. So, and it's, that problem with those January signings, that those issues have just been exacerbated because they have so much strength and depth. And also, we're still not even quite sure where all these players are playing and what his best 11 could possibly be.
We've got 2 questions on Reece James. What are the chances of him starting?
Right. Well, yeah. So there'll be a lot of talk because obviously he attracts a lot of interest. I don't have Reece James in this start 11. That's mainly because of the fact that he's coming off the back of consecutive 90-minute performances. And again, we're talking about a player who has well-documented injury problems. He's just returned to that first team. And I just think it's a little bit of a push to expect him to start that 3rd game in a week, given those injury problems. And, Chabaloa, before he was ousted out of that start 11, had been in pretty decent form himself and would maybe consider himself a little bit unlucky. So that's why I have Chabaloa back in that 11. But like I say, this comes down, these are just judgment calls, and I'm trying to maybe look at the wider picture around what's happened before in the management of the squad, which is why I have Reece James on the bench.
Sindri has said Potter is copying Pep. Is Potter the English Pep? Some could say. Crystal Palace then up next. The Eagles, kind of intermittent form, especially since the World Cup. One of the big losses for the team is obviously Wilfried Zaha. Any chance of him being back soon? And is there any other important injury news for the team as well?
The Eagles are pretty much as you were. There was hope with regards to Wilfried Zaha when we've seen training ground footage of him being out there on the pitches and working. However, and we always talk about this, you take those with a pinch of salt. It's a snapshot in time. You don't know what's going in the wider scheme of things. And lo and behold, Patrick Vieira says, look, we're not really expecting him to be back with the first team for a couple of weeks yet. So it could be, heading into March when we see Zaha back in the team. The other sort of talking point ahead of this game would be the fitness of Joachim Andersen. There was no mention in that pre-match press conference, although he was expected to train with the squad this week. But I feel that Tompkins would be very unfortunate to lose his place after his performance last week and also his goal against Brighton.
So from Crystal Palace to Everton, and I was expecting better things from the team against Liverpool, but they got caught out with 2 kind of very pacey counter attacks. But what is the kind of team news there? You've not got Dominic Calvert-Lewin in there. Has he picked up another injury?
Yeah, it's the hamstring problem that did keep him out of that Merseyside derby. Sean Dyche, very guarded with what he was saying, but he's sort of
touch and go.
But touch and go last week at best he was, but there was no. I tell you what, we did have because they're playing against Leeds this week, and the Leeds manager actually referenced the fact that a couple of his players were touch and go. So I don't know if it's that Sean Dyche effect that's starting to drip feed into other managers, but there you go. Ellis Sims started against Liverpool. The youngster made that step up. Great experience for him, but Sean Dyche did say that it was a 50-50 course. So I'm going with the more experienced Neil Maupay. We haven't seen a lot of Demarai Gray under Sean Dyche either. First week, that first week was probably because it was hampered through illness. And I still can't manage to shoehorn him into this team as it currently stands. Of course, Dwight McNeil is seeing a lot of game time at the moment. Hadn't played under his former boss at Burnley.
I mean, if they could fit Gray in, it would be Gay, Gray and Maupay. It does sound like a bit of a TV show. I'd love that. We've got a question about Nathan Patterson, though. Will he be back for Double Game Week 25? I think a lot of people are very interested in him as an asset, but is he even the right asset to go for in that Everton back line? Would you go for somebody else?
Look, you've mentioned it a lot of times before, and it came to fruition on Monday night. James Tarkowski, just before that Liverpool goal, that breakaway, he hit the post, so a matter of inches away from getting himself on the score sheet, and I had a clean sheet against Arsenal. Nathan Patterson, well, he will play in a game for the under-21s today, which is Friday. Now it depends on how he comes through that game, but suffice to say, is he ready for that step up into the first team? Well, he needs to get a full week of training under his belt first. And then even then, he does lack that sharpness. And, Seamus Coleman has been doing a commendable job on the right-hand side. So if you would ask me now, is Nathan Patterson in contention to start both games in game week 25? I would say absolutely not.
And then, it's probably a little bit off in the future, but Andros Townsend, he's one of those kind of archetypal, hardworking players that maybe Sean Dyche might like in his team. Could he be threatening, the likes of Iwobi, McNeil anytime soon?
Difficult, because he was scheduled to return earlier this year in January, and then a setback scuppered any of those plans. So it's always difficult when a player suffers a setback from a long-term injury. As you know, you don't really want to put any kind of date on that potential return to play. A lot of these activities now are it's activity-based protocols, so you will need to go through a series of exercises, a series of protocols to put himself in contention. But as it currently stands, there's been absolutely no mention of Townsend, which is probably a fairly good indication that he isn't close at this moment.
Fair enough. FPL Prem Tipster has gone one above the Gay, Gray and Mbappe, and he said, Ghana, and Onana. Love it, absolutely love it. Fulham up next. You've kind of already mentioned the Mitrovic situation, but you might want to go through it again. Just people might have missed it, and obviously they might be looking at the timestamps for Mitrovic as well, and Willian too. But on top of those two as well, any other information that we should be aware of?
Yeah, Anthony Robinson missed training earlier the week due to a little bit of a fever, but he has trained since then. Marco Silva thinks, or probably, he will have everybody available other than those long-term absentees. So that Mitrovic injury that I alluded to, going all the way back to that international break in October, complained during last weekend's warm-up that he was in a little bit discomfort, but managed to complete 84 minutes. And for Willian, he came off with a calf complaint. But like I say again, Silva does expect to have almost a fully fit squad. Long-term absentees, Niskin Cabano, Achilles out, and also Tom Kearney, who picked up that problem in the FA Cup at Sunderland.
Yeah, and I think the big thing, as long as they keep Bernd Leno fit and healthy, he's just on incredible form this season. Arsenal have done Fulham a solid by selling, a really, really good goalkeeper to them. One of the bits of data that I absolutely love is he's the highest performing goalkeeper in terms of XG prevented in Europe's top 5 leagues this season. He's really doing wonderful bits between the sticks for Fulham. But Leeds are up next. Another one of those teams who maybe at times this season they've had problems with injuries. Is the situation improving at all for them?
Ever so slightly. I mean, there's question marks over Mark Rocker and also Liam Cooper. They have missed the last few with a muscle problem. I don't really see them threatening a starting 11, if the truth be told. I have Woober left-hand side centrally, and Pascal Struijk is back after coming through those concussion protocols. Luis Sinisterra picked up a hamstring injury in that first game against Manchester United. It was hoped that was more of a minor issue, more of a precautionary measure. That isn't the case. So we're maybe a week or two away, which is why we have Somerville starting up top. The other sort of glaring change that I've made is bringing in Jorginho Ruta up front, and that's in place of Patrick Bamford. Again, this is one that it is a 50-50 call. Bamford is getting back up to pace, following a succession of injuries that date back probably over the last maybe 18 months, so he still isn't quite there. It's going to be a judgment call. It could be that he goes with the experience of Bamford, but like I say, I just went with just to freshen things up and just to see if they can have a little bit more luck in front of goal.
Now Leicester are up next. Very difficult game for them this week against Manchester United. But what is the latest with their injury situation?
The only change that I had difficulty sort of picking up was whether I would include Yuri Tielemans in this. A calf injury kept him out of last weekend and had a great result Another win, a second consecutive game where they scored 4 goals. However, Tielemans has recovered from that calf problem, so I do include him in that starting 11. That's the only change that I'm going with for Brendan Rodgers.
Just switch it back to Leeds. DeAndre has asked, do you think Somerville is nailed for now? Sorry, for Leeds, is Somerville nailed for now?
Oh, nailed. Like I say, that'll come down to maybe the fitness of Sinistera, but also you have Aronson in there. So we've seen Aronson play on that right-hand side. Somerville is young, he's still learning his trade. He's still getting used to the Premier League, so I wouldn't necessarily say that he's as nailed as maybe Nonto on the opposite flank.
Interesting indeed. And just with the kind of Leicester back line, Johnny Evans, is he close to return? Because, they always play better when he is in the defence. But what is the latest on him?
Yeah, I mean, he was rumoured to be, or certainly Brendan Rodgers was hoped he was, but he suffered another setback on the training pitches this week. This return from this ongoing calf problem has been blighted with little knocks and niggles and setbacks along the way. So it looks as if that time frame for return to play has now been pushed, and it could be some weeks before we see the veteran defender back in contention.
So moving from the Foxes to the Reds of Liverpool. And again, I think this will be maybe a tester game for Liverpool, because obviously Newcastle, your boys, one of the best teams in the league, definitely the best defence, I'd say, in the league this season. Just absolutely outstanding. But people are almost testing their assets for the double game week 25. So what is the kind of latest injury information and maybe some tactics in there as well? Who do you think is going to be the ones to watch for double game week 25?
Yeah, Virgil van Dijk returned to the matchday squad in the Merseyside derby, and Jurgen Klopp said he's probably in a position now to start. They've lacked that leader at the back. So for me, he comes straight in. It really is a toss-up between who he plays alongside, whether it be Joel Matip or Joe Gomez. Previously, it would have been Matip all day long. However, he's been poor. He's been well below those previous performance levels. So that's why we went with Gomez. Again, I've been stuck on Trent for a few weeks because I've had fires to put out elsewhere. For me, I think he could be a player, to watch potentially over the coming games. It's difficult because is it a false dawn with Liverpool? You have to, consider the opposition in the Merseyside derby. They're going to be up for that. That was, it's a cup final. It was a massive game. Can they come up to Newcastle and get a result? And I'm slightly concerned as a Newcastle supporter because, one, I think we're going to have one eye on that Carabao Cup final, and secondly, injuries are going to mean that we're going to be in, Eddie Howe will change the formation. I'm expecting us to move from a 4-3-3 to a 4-2-3-1, and that might take a little bit of time to adapt. I'm not so bothered in terms of the personnel because it means Anthony Gordon will come in. But look, we'll see how Liverpool respond here. I'll be watching them closely. If they can put in a good performance and get a result on Tyneside, don't forget that they're only team to have beaten Newcastle this season, albeit it took a goal in time added on to do so. Then, I can see them pushing on through until the end of the season.
In terms of maybe the attacking personnel then for this double game week 25, a lot of people are looking at those games. I'm still very sceptical. I'm still very kind of cautious because, looking at the underlying data, since the World Cup, they've underperformed their XG by around 4 goals. So they had an XG of 12.62 and they've only scored 8 goals. And, defensively, they've been pretty poor as well. But what is even more worrying is this isn't just like a post-World Cup thing. We've seen them bad all season. And over the course of the season, they've underperformed their XG by around 6 goals. So they had 43.53 XG, which is the second best in the league. And they've scored 36. And so maybe it's this kind of almost gambler's fallacy or kind of, right, that they've underperformed. but they will turn it round now. It's kind of this false hope that will happen every week. This is the week they'll turn it round. You know, they've got the underlying data to do it, but there's something going wrong there in terms of it. I think it's personnel. You know, they don't have maybe the midfield. The finishing is not as good as it was this season, and I think part of that is Salah's just not getting involved as much as he has in the past. But maybe for the personnel then, if you were going to say, pick these ones for double game week 25, is Gakpo nailed? Is Nunez nailed? Salah's definitely nailed, but what about Jota or Firmino?
You know, we're talking about a handful of minutes from the bench in the Merseyside derby. I think Jota was around about 20 plus time added on. Firmino 10 plus time added on. You know, they're coming off the back of fairly lengthy injuries, in particular Jota. He's been severely hampered since, I think, around about June last year, where he picked up that hamstring injury in the Nations League, maybe. So, you know, it would be a bit of a risk from Jurgen Klopp to be throwing him in from the start to go with, and then to start him in consecutive matches. You know, that Liverpool attack for me is a slight concern. Like you say, Salah for me is nailed. I think Nunez is probably the next safest option, and maybe Gakpo on that left-hand side is one that could come under, you know, a little bit of pressure. If Jurgen Klopp wants to, you know, revert to that 4-2-3-1 as we have seen in the past, then is Nunez is that, you know, out-and-out striker. Then that opens up a position maybe for Firmino. You know, with maybe Jurgen Klopp deciding to drop either Henderson or Fabinho. Basic probably deserves his place. You know, he's young, he's athletic, he's got the legs, whereas those other two in midfield, like I say, may struggle with games in quick succession to play that high press, you know, that and to implement that game plan that Jurgen Klopp wants.
Manchester City up next. You know, another team that you always find quite hard to predict. Any big changes in terms of injury news, though?
I think I got 10 again last week with the City lineup, which I was quite pleased with. I think there was a few on the timeline questioned the absence of Ake, and that transpired that he wasn't involved. So I'll take any small win with this City lineup. There was only one change again midweek. That was Ake coming in for Laporte. Because he's went with a more or less starting 11, the same starting 11 of 2 games in a row, I have changed it up ever so slightly. Kyle Walker moving out and moving to a more of a 4-3-3. We've seen a 3-2-4-1 and 4-2-3-1. There's a lot of flexibility within this team, so I wouldn't read too much into the setup as we've got it. Yeah, but that's how we see things. The only injury concern that they have is John Stones, and he's maybe 7 to 14 days away.
On to the other side of Manchester, the red side. What is the latest injury information with them?
Yeah, pretty much as you were. Scott McTominay could potentially train ahead of the game, but lacks fitness and certainly won't be pushing for a start. Casemiro, he serves the final game of his ban, so he won't be involved either. Wan-Bissaka started in the new camp against Barcelona, so that suggests that Dalot would start again on the right-hand side. The only other position I potentially see up for grabs may be Jadon Sancho dropping out. Rashford has moved across on the right-hand side with Garnacho starting on the left, but Rashford, who has been unplayable and unstoppable really since the restart, you know, he loves that left-hand side. So therefore, I don't see Eric Ten Hag, you know, messing things too much, which is why I've went with this starting 11.
You've given Jandre the willies because he said no Mahrez.
For Manchester City.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's what we say every week about, you know, I'm never invested in any of the City assets other really than Edison. If your name's not Edison or Haaland, then look, your name's in the mix and you could be dropped from there. And I know there are a lot of Mahrez owners out there that will look at this, but I just think maybe I don't think he was great against Arsenal. And Bernardo done a job. I just think maybe, you know, Pep changes things up ever so slightly, but I'm sure, I may be wrong. I've been wrong many times before. So take this with a pinch of salt. It's just my opinion.
Oh, I can count the number of times you've been wrong on my hand.
Big hands.
Newcastle up next. As you said a little bit earlier, you think that the team are going to switch up formation. Is that for injury reasons?
Yeah, Joe Willock, he went off at Bournemouth with a hamstring-related problem. Hopefully not too serious. Could play in the Carabao Cup. I am expecting Callum Wilson to return to the matchday squad. He missed out against his former employers because of a hamstring issue as well. But Isak gets the nod for me. I think any involvement from Wilson will be from the bench. San Maxim's fine and Almiron are fine after picking up minor knocks against Bournemouth.
There you go. And how long do you reckon Wilson will be out for then?
Wilson could return this weekend. If he comes through training today, then I think he'll be on the bench. They'll want to manage him carefully. Of course, we've got that Carabao Cup final. We did hear him on the Footballers Football podcast this week, and he spoke about previously, even when he was around 70 or 80% fit, he would always put his hand up and throw his hat into the ring. He said now, as he's getting a little bit older, a little bit wiser, he needs to manage himself and his body a little bit better. So he will only, go out there if he's 100%. And like I say, he's maybe lacking that little bit of sharpness. And of course, that Carabao Cup final, so I like to say I'm maybe a 20 to 25 minute cameo from the bench, all being well against Liverpool. And that sets him up nicely for that final at Wembley.
There you go. Nottingham Forest, don't think too many people are invested in them. Quick injury news on them, like milliseconds.
Impossible to talk about Forest and their injury problems in a matter of seconds. We're not really expecting too much change. I think they have 10 players currently sidelined. To give a little bit of context of how bad things are in the for Forest this season, we've had 94 days since Forest started their Premier League campaign, and they've already amassed almost 3 years. That's 3 years on the sidelines with injured players.
Yeah, it is interesting with Nottingham Forest. The good thing is they've got a big old squad, don't they? They keep dipping into the massive amount of players that they signed.
And yet they still have to put a request into the Premier League to bring the likes of Steve Cook hopefully back into the squad after he was omitted from that initial squad 25-man list last month.
Absolutely amazing, isn't it? But there you go, just quickly on screen. That ruled out list is pretty damn long, and the pending evaluation as well. Southampton, another one that you're targeting to score against, not really targeting any players, but quick injury news there.
Not a lot from caretaker manager Ruben Selesh. I suppose the two talking points maybe the potential return of Kyle Walker-Peters. There was no mention in the press conference, but he has been seen on the training pitches. There was also question marks over the fitness of Shea Adams. That's why I have new signing Ununachu leading the line for the Saints.
Brilliant pronunciation. That's why people tune in for brilliant.
Love you, Jay. Love you, Jay.
Tottenham up next, and you've kept Pedro Porro in the side after the huge amount of criticism that he got. And it was quite interesting because last week when we were on stream, we were discussing this, weren't we? A lot of Tottenham fans were thinking everything is Emerson Royale's fault and Pedro Porro is going to come in, he's going to be the best player ever. And then he was quite exposed in that game against Leicester.
Got absolutely annihilated from former boss Tim Sherwood, who was watching the game. I think he said it was the worst performance he's ever seen on a full debut, and that he should be relieved of his duties. Last week's stream, I think I had Emerson Royale starting on the right. He had played well the week before, he had scored, so maybe a little bit unfortunate. And of course, Tottenham went to AC Milan on Tuesday night, got it, played all right, and Emerson Royale was in the starting 11 there. But I think Christian Stellini is at the helm. We know Antonio Conte's returned to Italy to have a little bit of time out recovering from that post-surgery. Look, Porro needs time to adapt. We can write that one off as just being a bad day at the office. You can't afford to have too many of those. But like I say, I think you'll give the opportunity to bounce back this weekend.
And just for people interested, Ben and I have combined for a really interesting article on Rodrigo Bentancur and his injury, given a bit of information, data analysis on when he is supposed to come back. That's on the Patreon. I can put a link to that in a little bit. West Ham up next, though. What is the latest for the Hammers? Danny Ings back in the starting 11.
Yeah, I think he deserves his opportunity. Mikel Antonio, he's workmanlike, just hasn't had the rub of the green, not getting the goals. Danny Ings, opportunity now to build that fitness. He had that little bit of a knee issue. So I think, in my opinion, he's probably done enough to deserve a start. Thomas Souček, I have coming in. We do know that Paquetá, who fell awkwardly during the open exchange of that Chelsea game. That's a collarbone, right-hand side, same as before, but different ligament. Hopefully not too long-term. In the other change that I have, and it's not a definite, but we've seen Nayev Agard limp off with an adductor issue. This isn't the first time that it's happened. He's had ongoing problems, particularly at the World Cup. Isn't categorically ruled out. David Moyes said he does have an outside chance, but for the purposes of this week, I am erring on the side of caution, and I have went with Ben Johnson on the right-hand side of a 3.
Matlock's asked, any update on Zuma?
Zuma progressing, like I say, shouldn't be too far away. There was a little bit of talk or rumours with regards to his setback, how he had seen Kurt Zuma wearing a boot to support, but it wasn't. It was a recovery compression wear. In fact, it was used to aid his recovery, so there's no setback with regards to that. But maybe, like I say, just in terms of where he is and his fitness, this weekend will probably be too soon. But like I say, maybe before the end of this month, we could see him back in training fully for the Hammers.
Now, finally, Wolves, what is the latest there?
Yeah, Mario Lamina sent off last weekend. Controversially, I have to add that second yellow card, reportedly for running aggressively at the referee and or the third person to say something to a referee. I mean, I'm not sure if that's a rule or not, but he picked up his second yellow, and for that reason alone, he will serve a 1-match ban. So João Gomez has an opportunity, in my opinion, to come in that 4-2-3-1. Wolves have been on a decent run of late. Hugo Bueno, owners, slightly disappointed at his lack of game time in recent matches, but I really don't see him ousting Ait-Nouri at this moment.
Well, there you go. That is the end of this week's stream. We hope that you found that extremely useful. And that was absolutely Ben hated that. Won't say that joke again. But we hope that you found it useful. And we will be back again next week. So keep that in your diaries, the usual time, just to answer all your questions. But for now,